one of his students asked Buddha, "Are you an angel?" "No," answered Buddha. "Are you a saint?" "No," Buddha replied. "Are you a wizard?" "No," Buddha responded. "Are you a teacher?" "No, I am not a teacher." "Are you a man?" "No." "Then what are you?" asked the student, exasperated. "I am awake," Buddha replied.
I would like to start today with, in the beginning there was no war, there was no violence, there were no random attacks. I'd like to say that there was once a time when the world was full of empathy, love, caring, and all the children had full tummies. But I can't say that. Paris, Beirut, they just happened. Hundreds of lives lost, and the rest of the world stricken, blindsided by, once again, are we safe? What can we do to help? Do we have any power? Well, today what I'd like to do is awaken us a little bit more to find our own empowerment, to see what it is we can do, to see what it is we can do to help ourselves, our families, our loved ones, and how maybe we can impact the world just a little. Hi, I'm Dr. Guldal, and I'd like to welcome you to Are You Awake? Asking you the question, are you awake today? And what are you going to do to awaken yourself and to bring your life a little more joy? When we're going about our regular day, and all of a sudden, planes fall into the World Trade Center, and people that are standing around the block heading into work, leaving the building, leaving an appointment, look up, and this plane just crashes into this building, and we just hear the screaming of the people jumping out of the windows, the helplessness we feel. When we hear the news of Paris and the urban city, people just going back and forth, having a cup of coffee, and hundreds of lives lost. Beirut, same thing, suicide bombers, children dying. So many of us were left with this feeling, well, so many feelings actually, feelings of, powerlessness. How can we help? What can we do? We go about our day, we watch the news, we talk with our friends and our coworkers, and we speak about how awful it is, isn't it horrible? And we commiserate in the pain, and we commiserate in the sense of powerlessness, because what can we do? It's done, it's happened. We could be walking to work, the same thing could happen to us in our car, out of nowhere. It's one thing when there's an accident or an illness, but when it's a pure act of violence, of terrorism, of hate, it shakes our soul, the entire world. It affects all of us. We watch the news, we hear the voices of the people speaking, we hear family members crying, and yet it's so far away from many of us. And at the same time, we feel it deep in our core. And we collect these experiences of this trauma, of violence, of this attack. And as much as we like to think it doesn't really affect our day-to-day, it does. It affects us because it reminds us that at the end of the day, we have no control. We don't have any control around these things. We don't have total control over our mortality. Anything could happen at any time. And that has been a great source of anxiety for all of us from the moment we're born. This experience of, am I sick? Am I dying? Am I going to lose somebody I love? This undercurrent of anxiety that we all live with. It awakens that, but it also awakens a sense of, how do I help? How do I make a difference? I don't want to live in a world of violence. What can I do? And we look around and we think there's nothing we can do. So we either bury our heads, keep going in our day-to-day, but we notice more anxiety. Most often what we find is when there's an attack like this or something traumatic happens, like when Princess Diana died, there are all kinds of reports from psychologists, counselors, sociologists, that people had an increase of symptoms. People were more depressed, more irritable, cranky, had a ton more anxiety, couldn't sleep well. Nobody was really correlating it to maybe the Princess Diana. Same thing with the World Trade Center, even worse, of course. People weren't making the connection. It's what happened at the World Trade Center, but what was happening around offices around the world, but definitely the research came out of the United States. And that was that people with depression had much more increase of symptoms. Same thing with anxiety, more sleeplessness. Many people were irritable. But most of us don't make that connection that it's to this horrible thing that happened. But we notice everybody's a little cranky. It's been like that this week. Think about it. Think about yourself. Have you been a little more irritable, a little more depressed, not sleeping well, not wanting to get out of bed, kind of trudging a little bit through your day? Are you more anxious? Are you more concerned about your loved ones? Do you have more worry that something's going to happen to you? Do you feel sicker than maybe you did a week ago? We can't say we're not affected because we are. But the first thing is to be awake to that, right? To be understanding of, okay, of course, this horrible thing happened. It can happen anytime. I could get in a train wreck, a car accident. ISIS could land in my backyard. This is normal human evolution. This is normal human experience. None of us want to live in a world of violence, yet we always have, whether it's in our backyard or across the globe. But today, with the internet and the digital world, everything's right in front of us. We can't escape it. Do you know that the generation of kids that are now in school have more anxiety than ever reported before? More depression. We have to find a way to remind ourselves that we do have power and we can make a difference. In the late 1970s, the Maharishi ran a study, and he was a guru that came to the United States mid-70s, and he believed that if we created a global consciousness of peace, that we could make change. And this is way before physics had anything to do with spirituality or what we understand. But he completely believed that if many people at the same time put their intention on positivity, it would affect change in the community. This was the beginning. There were 7,000 individuals that sat in meditation. I believe it was 20 minutes in the morning or longer, all with the same focus: to reduce crime, to bring love, compassion, and empathy to the environment. At the end of 3 weeks, crime rate, suicide, all were reduced by 16%. 72% reduction in terrorist activity around the world during that time. So that was the beginning of this type of study, and since then there's been over 50 studies that came out with similar effects. But today, with physics, field effect, string theory, we understand that if we are in a certain vibration in our bodies and we send a certain image and sensation out into the world, it affects change in the world. An interesting study that was repeated in 1987, from 1987 to 1992 in Merseyside, Wales. Merseyside was the third largest crime city in the entire country of Wales, and by 1992 it was the lowest crime rate. So these are interesting little facts, and I don't want to bore us all with a ton of statistics, but the point of the matter is we can make a difference. We can make a difference globally with just our intention, which is really prayer. When our body is in a certain vibration, when our heart is open and our entire being is in one place with one thought, that's prayer in a way. Are we praying to God? Are we praying for the world? However we want to think about it, intention, affirmations, prayer. When we put our focus on one thing, it makes a difference. So I'm going to come back around at this in just a moment. I want to circle back around and let's just talk about our personal selves. There's a story of the Buddha. He's walking, doing his walking around India, and he runs into a father and a son. And the father has one flask of water, and he could tell that they were impoverished. There was no food. They just had this little bit of water. And the father kept giving the water to the son and not drinking any for himself. And the father was getting weaker and weaker. And the Buddha was just walking with them. And at one point he looked at the father and asked him, "What are you doing?" And the father said, "Well, I want to make sure my son is okay. I'm giving him the water." And Buddha looked at him and said, "If you don't take care of yourself, and if your son falls, you won't be able to catch him. You will have no strength." We're looking at this global consciousness and the violence and how it affects all of us and our children and our loved ones and how we feel helpless to it. What's most important is how do we take care of ourselves first so that we can maybe set aside 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it takes, to sit in prayer, intention, meditation for the world. We can't. We can't do it. The very first thing that we must do is take care of ourselves. When you get on an airplane, and if you're listening, those of you that listen, they talk about how the mask comes down and the first thing you have to do is put the oxygen mask around your face and your mouth before you do it for your children. It's the same thing. If we don't find a way to take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anybody else. And it's moments like this, it's moments like these types of terrorist attacks that can be used as a catalyst and a reminder for us on how to do that. Like, how do we take a moment and breathe and get out of the routine and the rut that we're living in and just take a moment to be present with self? Because although we don't make the correlation that we're sicker or more anxious or more depressed or more stressed this week than we were 2 weeks ago, this week right after the attacks, if we don't make that correlation, then we're not being present, we're not being awake. We're not talking about, or I'm definitely not talking about giving the attackers power. I'm talking about we take our power back. I've had more cancellations this week due to colds than I can remember, except for the last time there was an attack. We get run down. It runs our immune system down. Even you can hear a little nasally in my voice. We are affected by everything around us. When we awaken to that, and we can create a sense of, what can I do for me and my loved ones? How do I make a difference so that I don't feel caught off by the knees? That's the first step. That's the first step in this awakening. And there are many things we can do. First, we pay attention to it. Secondly, we can take a few moments to really follow our breath. 2 minutes. Because following our breath brings us back to center, brings us back to core, takes us out of anxiety. In other words, it awakens the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we're in fight or flight, even if we don't know we are, it quiets us. And in that breath, certain parts of the brain are activated. And when those parts of the brain are activated, we're calmer, we're clearer, and our heart opens. So we can attend to those that we love, those people around us, without trying. It just happens. There are many examples of that, but let's just talk about right now, what can you do in this moment while you're hanging out with me? I wasn't sure which way I wanted to take this today, but I knew I had to talk about Paris and Beirut. But I also knew what was most important in my heart was how to share this message of empowerment with all of you, because that's my life's goal. So you just take a moment and pay attention to your breathing. It's very simple. Breathe in through your nose, fill your belly, and breathe out gently through your mouth. You can breathe in through your nose, fill your belly, and breathe out, exhale. Instantly, the body physiology brings us to center. And in this moment, we're more alive. Our immune system is increased that quickly. This is the kind of power we have over ourselves. So then what else can you do? In that moment, look at somebody. One of the best ways we're going to counteract this type of terrorism in our own backyard is to first find ourselves, find our heart. Breathing is the best way. And at the end of today's podcast, we'll do a meditation, we'll do a visualization of breathing and quieting. The other thing to do, which is really, I think, so very powerful, is do something kind. Open a door, ask somebody how they're feeling, but mean it. Ever notice how we're like, hey, how are you? We don't mean it. All of a sudden somebody actually tells us how they're doing and we get really annoyed. Like, well, why are we even asking? Like, hey, how you doing? Why don't we mean it? Make eye contact with somebody. And, this goes for men and women. Look around, do this breathing exercise, do it 3 times, notice your heart open. And wherever you are, the grocery store, in the car, at work, doesn't matter. Take a moment, make eye contact. Let somebody in front of you in line. One simple act of kindness. All the great scholars talk about how we find our sense of power through doing for others. If you have time for greater charity, absolutely. Winter's coming, get some blankets, take them to the homeless. But I'm talking about what we can do right now, this second, today. We take deep breaths, we open our heart, we awaken to the fact that we are all unified, we're connected, and then just do something simple. You can buy a Starbucks for the person behind you, or you can buy a Starbucks for somebody who really needs it, but it doesn't matter. One simple act of kindness is like a brush fire. It's a funny thing because, the research talks about if somebody looks us in the eye and smiles and it's genuine, how the entire day can change for us. These are the simple things we lose sight of. And I want to thank you for letting me hang out with you today and just kind of talk about this. Usually I like to tell stories of what happens to certain people or what happens to me, and I want to do that today. I was in South Africa shooting Peace Squared, which hopefully will air soon. We'll be airing, I think, in January, but Peace Squared is an extension of what we're doing here, more visual. But we were in South Africa and looking at where is South Africa today post-apartheid. I walked through the Apartheid Museum. Well, there were so many powerful moments I can't begin to explain. But the Apartheid Museum took, racism and slavery from its beginning and walked you through, and they did this incredible job with the architecture and the lighting and the visualization. It was walking through these dark tunnels with all of these huge, huge pieces of imagery, and you had to walk through, prison cells and hanging ropes where people were hung. You saw the pictures of death and destruction everywhere. You saw the images of people who were given ID cards because they were told they wouldn't know their own names. And, it's a whole other sense of violence, and talk about being affected in that moment. If one walks through something like the Apartheid Museum open for the experience, one lives it. And I had a South African guide who walked me through. Well, there were several of them that day. But when you come out, it opens up to this beautiful light, and there's this whole area of rock on one side. And you're asked, as you cross the bridge, you're asked to pick up the rock from the darkness and put it into the pile of light under the South African flag. And it's a symbolic, tactile action that each person going through the museum gets to take in terms of we can come out of darkness, we can lift the rock, and we can walk into light. It was beyond words. And I looked at this woman and I said, how do you do this every day? Because she said to me when we were walking through the pictures, it showed a picture of people standing in line for their first time to be able to vote. She said that her mother stood in that line for 16 hours. She said she remembered that day. No food, no water, no bathroom, just stood in the line in the joy of that day. And I looked at her and I said, how do you do it? And she looked at me and her eyes teared up, mine teared up. She said, walking through these halls, I found forgiveness. I found a way to let it go. I moved the rock from the heavy place to the light place. And that was an extremely powerful moment for me. And I know it's what we're talking about today. How do we do it? We do it within ourselves first. If the people of South Africa could not do this, well, there wouldn't be a South Africa. Desmond Tutu talks about there wouldn't be. It would be destroyed with violence. Are they struggling? Of course they are. But what you hear out of the mouths of most people is their attempt to be in the light, their attempt to follow the actions of Nelson Mandela. No, it's not always easy. And that's been very impactful for me in this process of what we're talking about today. Because it's that simple. It goes back to all the research that I studied when I was a crazy nerdy student, always studying, in that in times of acute and chronic pain, of suffering, when we feel least powerful, if we breathe with the expectation of sending love and light, if we do simple acts of kindness, if we care about the person next to us gently, then it actually does affect change. It affects change in us first and foremost. So back to string theory, if we're different, if we're not feeling powerless, but we're more awakened to our own personal power, and we know that personal power comes from compassion, And we know that the best way to get there is some simple breathing, eye contact, sending love, prayer, hope, intention. It's not a small thing. And I hear often in my office, there's nothing I can do but pray, there's nothing I can do but think positive. And the truth of it is, the research bears it out. The research tells us that that's not a small thing, that may be the biggest thing ever. Now, I don't know, just take a moment to think about that, what if my awakening my personal power not only changes my world, there's going to be some shows where we talk about meditation changing the brain and what it does to our immune system. I'm being much more on the surface with it today because I want to talk about Paris and Beirut and ISIS and where we're living today. I want to talk about it in terms of hope and power. What if that what we think is all we can do is really the most powerful thing that we can do? Boy, doesn't that just like a huge paradigm shift? Doesn't just like turn it on its head? It does. It takes it from the esoteric field to all I can do is get down on my knees to if I take really good care of myself and stay awake and clear, and do some breathing, meditation, prayer, and I'm kind to people, those I care about, and strangers, and stay focused, my entire being changes, and in my entire being changes, that sends out currents across the universe in ways that nothing else can. So it's that exponential thing, right? 1 + 1 is 2, 4, 8, 16, 64, 128, and off we go. We can do that by being kind in the grocery store, especially in times like now, times like today. Now, on the flip side of that, it's easy to get caught up in, isn't it awful? Yes, it's awful. But notice that when you spend a lot of time reading the news, listening to the news, talking about it with friends, that you feel worse. So just be awake to that, be clear about that. Of course, we need to talk about it. We need to clear ourselves of the pain of it or the horror of it because we can't wrap our minds around it, the shock. But note that if you spend too much time there, especially before bed, that you feel worse. We all feel worse. So do your best to be in a self-monitoring kind of place and know that if each one of us do the best we can with this today, that the people we love and care about will feel safer because we feel safer. I don't know. To me, that seems extremely important. I'm so grateful that I get to hang out with you today and share my heart. And I hope my heart has made a difference for you, wrapped up in some research and academic knowledge. Quieting that amygdala, awakening the heart, changing the vibration with some simple breathing. So stay with me, and I'm going to walk you through some very powerful breathing techniques that you can do wherever you are, and you can do with me. Okay, if you're in your car, don't close your eyes, but anywhere else, just take an exhale first. And in that exhale, just let go. In this moment, there's nothing you can do. Notice how your body's super tight. Notice how when you were listening to this podcast and you were being reminded of the terrorism in the world and the violence of the world, how your body was just super tight and clamped up. Maybe you were tucked over, tucked in, your pelvis was tucked in. Notice that in your body. And just let it go. That's right. The Buddhists do a breathing technique of compassion. And we're going to start with that today. And on the inhale, they notice the suffering. And on the exhale, release love and light. So that you're transforming what's dark and gray within yourself into light that you send outwards. So this has a double agenda here. We're changing your physiology, working on your central nervous system, awakening key elements in your brain. And as we shift your vibration, we're connecting to the laws of the universe, that of the field effect, and we're sending out on those currents, on those strings of currents, a vibration of light. So as you breathe in, release from your heart compassion for self, loved ones, and everyone around you. In, and as you breathe out, those currents go to the entire globe. As you envision yourself being lifted, your loved ones being lifted, your neighborhood, your city, your country, the world. Now do this 2 more times. And note your lower back, your sacral area, all of a sudden doesn't feel so tight. Your shoulder blades have released. Your sternum, front of your chest, that big thick bone, doesn't feel so tight. Your throat can move, and the top and the back of your head all of a sudden aren't as heavy as they've been. This is the empowerment that you have to affect change within you and outside of you. Now, as you feel the energy transmission through me, you will feel that become even more clear. Now just release, not just from your breath, but from your fingertips, the bottoms of your feet, and your toes. As you continue to breathe in and out, white light, peace. Knowing that as you continue to take care of yourself, the strength in you awakens the strength all around you. Take a moment to see yourself through your own eyes and feel that. Just feel that. And now, in your mind's eye, see the people you love with that same peace and beauty and love. Know that this isn't just for this moment. In this moment, we have made hard body changes within your brain, your heart, your cells. And stay with that. As you continue to breathe, stay in this beautiful light as long as you'd like. And know that if you open your crown, you open your heart and listen, the most important messages are always within. They come through a download, they awaken in our heart. We just know. One step at a time, one day at a time, to walk sacred, to be in love and light, especially now of all times.